What's good, big dogs? Welcome back into the BDGE Dynasty channel. My name is Adam. If you're new to the channel, go down and hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss any of the content that we're bringing to you every single week, Monday through Friday, here on the game of Dynasty. Also, make sure you're tapped in on the 25th, Thursday, for round one. Andrew, Nick, and myself will be streaming the entire thing live from New York City. You don't want to miss it, promise you. Now, today what I want to get into is actually the quarterback position. If you take a look at startups, in the first round especially, and definitely even the second round, the quarterback position really is going to be king if you take a look at where they're going in startups in Superflex. And because everybody wants to have an elite quarterback, that's why those guys are going there. Now, when we take a look at rookie drafts, right now, whether you should be taking a QB or a wide receiver, kind of a polarizing discussion. But what I want to do is actually, let's not talk about the receiver as a whole. Let's focus on QB. Now, if you want to get an elite quarterback, what are the characteristics or what makes an elite quarterback? Let's take a look. What I want to do is actually go through the numbers. Let's go look back at the last 5 years, so 23 to 2019. Who have been the difference makers at the position? What does it look like as far as points per game and WORP, wins over replacement player? And then ultimately, what are the characteristics of these quarterbacks? And then ultimately, what type of production thresholds need to be met or hit in order to actually become an elite scorer at this position? So we're going to get into all that. But before we do that, you already know what time it is. I need you to stand up, tuck your shirts in, stop yapping. Let's get into these QBs. All right, so let's get right into this quarterback data. So over the last 5 years, let's take a look at who have actually been the difference makers at the quarterback position, meaning which ones are the elite scorers that relative to a replacement level quarterback would be winning you a significant amount of games. So taking a look at WORP. WORP is wins over replacement player. So with WORP, let's say you had Patrick Mahomes, for example. In a 12-team league, what it's going to do is compare Patrick Mahomes versus the replacement level player. So in a 12-team league, the replacement level player is going to be defined as quarterback 13 because there's 12 teams in that league. So if you look at Patrick Mahomes versus quarterback 13 from weeks 1 to week 17, the entire season, how many wins would Patrick Mahomes have given you versus that quarterback 13? That's how you get WORP. Now, when we take a look at scoring, in Dynasty leagues and Sleeper, the majority, so over 50% of leagues, are actually going to be scored with 4-point per passing touchdown. So the data we're going to look at is 4-point per passing touchdown. I'll briefly, before we get out of here, discuss the difference with 6-point per passing touchdown. But using 4-point per passing touchdown as the standard, when we take a look at WORP, in that format where it's 4-point per passing touchdown. So if they have a WORP of 2, that means that quarterback is going to win you 2 extra games across the whole season versus quarterback 13. If we use that as the bar, it gives us a very good idea and sample size of what these type of quarterbacks look like, the elite difference makers. And what's pretty easy in 4-point per passing touchdown, that basically says that they're going to give you a really good chance to get to at least 21 points per game, if not significantly higher as well. So that sets a good baseline as far as someone that's going to be an elite scorer, a difference maker at the QB position. All right, so let's take a look at the data and see who actually makes the list as far as the difference makers go. 2023, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson. Those are the 4 quarterbacks with over 2 wins versus the replacement level player in 2023. In 2022, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Joe Burrow make the list. 2021, Josh Allen and Tom Brady are the only 2 quarterbacks over 2 WORP in that season. 2020, we get our biggest list of data as far as how many guys were over 2 in WORP. That list is going to be Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and Ryan Tannehill actually makes it with over 2 WORP in the 2020 season. And then lastly, the 2019 season, there are 2 people which make the list, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott. Now, when we take a look at this data and figure out who are the finishers that actually have made up this list, there's 19 occurrences. 4 times Josh Allen made the list. So Josh Allen is the most likely over the last 5 years to be an elite scorer at the position. We've got Jalen Hurts twice, Patrick Mahomes twice, Dak Prescott actually makes the list twice, and Lamar Jackson makes the list twice. Then everybody after that, we got Kyler Murray. Then everybody after that has made the list 1 time over the last 5 seasons. And that list consists of Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, and Ryan Tannehill. Now, when we take a look at this list of the guys that have done this on multiple occasions, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts stand out immediately when I'm thinking of the rushing element of their game. We take a look at Lamar Jackson. In his 2 seasons where he's been over 2 in WORP, he threw for 3,127 yards back in 2019, and this year only threw for 3,678 yards. Now, you take a look at Josh Allen. He's thrown for over 4,300 yards in each one of the last 3 seasons. And while he's throwing the ball for a lot of passing yards, his rushing touchdown upside takes him to a completely different stratosphere when we look at his last 3 seasons. This last year, 15 rushing touchdowns. 2 years ago, he had 7 rushing touchdowns, and the year prior, 6 rushing touchdowns. Now, while there's a big range of outcomes there, 6 to 15, but if Josh Allen just as a floor is getting 6 rushing touchdowns, that's a huge difference in points as far as upside goes for a quarterback. So if we took all this data and we average it out, right, what does an average elite finisher look like across the last 5 years? In WARP, that's 2.28 WARP. In fantasy points per game, that's 23.77 points. Taking a look further at that now, if we were to take what this data was divided across all of it, if you're having a create a quarterback in a lab, let's say, you could create your own fantasy quarterback. These would be the threshold numbers if you averaged out everything for passing and rushing. So passing yards, you're looking at 43,032 yards. And for touchdowns, as far as passing goes, you need to see them hit about 33 to 34 passing TDs in order to hit this average. But while doing that, they'd also need to run for 500 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. So maybe a guy like Kyler Murray or Josh Allen is capable of hitting those numbers across all of them. There's not that many quarterbacks out there that are going to be running for 6 touchdowns on the ground, 500 yards on the ground, while also throwing 33 touchdowns on the season with 4,300 passing yards. Just for context, last year, as far as the quarterbacks that threw for over 33 touchdowns, only Dak Prescott threw for more than 33 touchdowns last year, and he threw for 36. Every other quarterback out there threw for less than 33 passing touchdowns. Now, obviously, when you filter out passing TDs of that number and rushing yards of that number, you're getting to an extremely small list. So let's take a look and really divvy this up into 2 different groups, the passing outlier group and the rushing outlier group. Meaning if you're a quarterback that offers a lot in the rushing department, what are the thresholds that you would need to meet versus if you're someone that doesn't really offer a lot of rushing upside, what are the thresholds that you need to meet there? So when you average out the rushing outlier, that's about 3,700 passing yards, 750 rushing yards, 9 to 10 rushing touchdowns with about 27 passing touchdowns. That's your running style numbers. And then when you take a look at the guys that don't really offer this rushing upside, the passing numbers, the passing outliers, you need about 4,800 passing yards as well as 38 passing touchdowns, combined with at least getting like 3 rushing touchdowns and 230 rushing yards. So those are the type of numbers you're going to need to hit if you have a quarterback that's more of a passing style pocket quarterback. Now, taking a look at the more recent data, if we just focus on 2022 and 2023, there's only been one time a quarterback's thrown for over 4,800 yards in those 2 years. That's Patrick Mahomes. In 22 season. Nobody else over the last 2 seasons has done that. And one of the things to talk about here is that the zone coverages are really going higher relative to the man coverages in the past. We're seeing a lot more of the zone coverage utilized, and the whole idea is to keep plays in front of you. They don't want to give up as many big time plays to these elite passing quarterbacks in the NFL. And then if you take a look at the data in the fantasy points per game department, you really start to see that last year, the quarterbacks that were difference makers, they didn't score nearly on average what they had in the past. Look at this year. Josh Allen at 24.2 fantasy points per game. You got Jalen Hurts at 21.9 fantasy points per game. Dak Prescott's the only one to make this list, and he's actually under 21 fantasy points per game. He's at 20.7. And then you got Lamar at 21.1. And when you take a look at the last 2 years, you're seeing at least 50% of these quarterbacks are running style quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen in 22. And this last year in 23, 3 of the 4 quarterbacks were the rushing style quarterback. When you take a look at Joe Burrow in the 22 season, he makes this list, and you start looking at the numbers, he actually hits career high in the rushing category those years when he had 5 rushing touchdowns and 257 rushing yards. Now, that 257 number isn't a ton, but when you figure that he ran for 5 TDs on the ground, that really elevates, again, the floor and the upside for Joe Burrow. So he didn't just have great numbers through the air, but he almost hit that rushing touchdown number that we talked about hitting at 6 when you're really averaging out the elite scorers over the last 5 seasons. Now, when I start to go over and really consume and digest all this data, when I'm looking at it, let's take a look at the quarterback landscape right now in Dynasty and what quarterbacks maybe are getting to a question mark range for me when I think about what they're going to probably have to do given their style of play. So the first one that's going to meet the list is obviously going to be CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud right now on Keep Trade Cut, he's definitively ahead of guys like Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. That one for me is a little bit tricky. I don't see how we can do that right now when I'm looking at this data as far as the production goes. CJ Stroud does bring in Stephon Diggs, but with the addition of Stephon Diggs, do we comfortably think that he's going to be able to hit 4,800 passing yards and 33 touchdowns? Last year he threw for 23. Let's even say, though, that he ends up hitting those numbers. CJ Stroud is not going to be a guy that's running for over 500 yards. So he's probably going to have to hit more like 5,000 passing yards, or he's going to have to get closer to 35, 38 passing touchdowns in order to become elite scorer at the position. So I think CJ Stroud right now, definitely a guy that's going to give you a chance to be in this range. But right now, I can't say for sure that he should be ahead of a guy like Jalen Hurts or a guy like Lamar Jackson. So right now, CJ Stroud, a great quarterback and probably even a very good fantasy quarterback. I just can't put him ahead of those guys, and that's where I think he's a little bit overvalued at the moment. And then obviously the next one is going to be in this rookie class, a guy like Caleb Williams. So with Caleb Williams, right now, Keep Trade Cut has him at quarterback 7. So he's in a different tier, and he's just below Joe Burrow. So we've seen Joe Burrow make this list. Obviously, we've seen everybody ahead of Caleb Williams, other than CJ Stroud, make the list as far as being an elite quarterback in fantasy football. Here's the thing with Caleb Williams. I love the cast of receivers that are going to be around him. Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet at a minimum. He's got DeAndre Swift coming out of the backfield now. They may even draft a receiver in this draft. So he's going to be surrounded with weapons, and I think he has the arm to really hit some of these passing numbers, and he's a mobile quarterback, but I don't know if he's quite capable of running for 500 yards on the ground. So Caleb Williams right now, when his price is getting a little iffy for me when I see him ahead of guys like Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, and maybe even Jaden Daniels is a conversation to have, and he's well ahead of Dak Prescott, who's been on this list twice, and we've seen actually be an elite passer of the football in 2 separate years. Now, conversely, let's talk about the running style quarterbacks, and let's talk about the elephant in the room. If you haven't thought about this, this is something that is a big issue potentially for the running style quarterbacks and where people don't want to draft them. Are they actually good NFL quarterbacks? And do teams give them the keys long term? Because in Dynasty, we're not just playing for the here and now, we're playing for the big picture. You think about a guy like Justin Fields, he didn't actually make that list. He was very close on 2 separate seasons, but he is a great runner and had some historic rushing seasons. But guess what? After 3 years, he's out of a job, currently battling with Russell Wilson for the quarterback position in Pittsburgh. So you look at a guy like Anthony Richardson. Does he actually have the tools to get the job long term with Indianapolis? You take a look at Jaden Daniels. Where ultimately is he going to go? He can run for a ton of yards, but is he a good enough quarterback to become a franchise QB and have a starting quarterback job for longer than, let's say, 2 or 3 seasons? That's part of the inherent risk. You talk about Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray's value really started to dip. People thought that he might not be the long-term quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, given that they have an early pick. But looks like Kyler Murray is actually safe as a quarterback. But that's the issue with the rushing style quarterback. And you're starting to weigh the risk and the reward of these rushing style quarterbacks, and basically how comfortable are you with them as a complete prospect. And then overall, when we take a look at the different quarterbacks that meet these rushing style quarterbacks, Kyler Murray for me is one that's extremely undervalued right now, and someone I've been trying to get a lot of shares of this offseason. I think Kyler Murray is one of the quarterbacks that actually fits all those averages. Like if we were to create a quarterback in a lab, the 500 rushing yards, the 6 rushing touchdowns, 33 passing touchdowns, and roughly 4,300 passing yards, Kyler Murray is one of the quarterbacks that if you think about them drafting an early round receiver to add to Trey McBride in this offense, I think he could actually check all the boxes for the averages and become an elite positional advantage at the quarterback position. He right now being valued at quarterback 11 on Keep Trade Cut. I think he's a big time value. Now, a little more polarizing, Anthony Richardson. He showed flashes of being dominant, absolutely going towards that Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen trajectory if he played a full season, but very short-lasted season last year. He's coming off the shoulder injury. So does he have the longevity? I think right now, if he stays healthy, there's no doubt that he could be a fantasy difference maker, kind of break fantasy in a season. But is he going to be good? Is he going to help the Colts win games? And how long does he keep the job? Similarly with Jaden Daniels, I think there's a range of outcomes where if Jaden Daniels can come in and run for over 500 yards, he has the tools to do that. And he could be one of these quarterbacks at a very young age that scores very well at the position. But is his team going to be good enough to where he's winning games and actually sustain a second contract with a team? That's going to be something that only time will be able to tell. Now, some key takeaways and some thoughts I want to leave you with. If I'm chasing or paying for a quarterback that's going to be an elite price tag one, do they really offer a lot of mobility? Are there someone that's going to give you more like 200 or 300 rushing yards? Or do you think that there's upside for them in the rushing department to hit over 500 yards, considering how small of a list that is? Not many quarterbacks give you 500 plus rushing yard upside each season. So thinking about their mobility is a big thing. If I'm actually chasing the elite quarterbacks, I have no problem if they can't actually get there with rushing yardage. But if they don't offer that, am I paying the right price if I'm drafting them or paying quarterback 2, quarterback 3 overall? And a rookie like Caleb Williams at quarterback 7 in Dynasty might be rich given the characteristics that they have realistically with production. And if you're betting on a passing outlier, that's probably not a problem either. But if you are doing that, do they actually have great weapons, and can they sustain that type of passing production? When we took a look last year at a guy like Patrick Mahomes, as great as he was, he could not do it without having the right talent around him. So those are some things to think about if you are going to go after the quarterback that just offers a lot as a passer and not nearly as much as a rusher. But that's all I got. It's just some things I wanted to talk with you about, kind of go over rushing floor and production, talk about Konami code, and then ultimately have you tell me. Tell me down in the comments what you think of this information. Does it change the way you view and approach the quarterback position in fantasy? Let me know down in the comments either way, and I'll see you back here, same time, same place, next week, talking more Dynasty strategy and trades. I'm out of this thing.